Greetings and welcome to the Practical Leadership Cast. I'm excited to have Sharon Ilenrey on to discuss leadership, being a VP, resiliency, and how to make an impact on the lives of people that you lead. I hope you enjoy the show. Sharon, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad to have you on.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
So can you take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Sharon Ilenrey. I'm currently the Vice President of Support at Dutchie, the leading technology provider in cannabis. I absolutely love the organization. Long story short, I was a person who started off as a failure in life. I was that kid who dropped out of high school, was homeless, living on floors, living in my car, didn't really have a path and didn't know what I was going to do. Thankfully turned my life around, finished up school, and got a job in the contact center, and I grew relatively quickly. And it's been one of those opportunities where I'm forever grateful for it. I've been able to lead teams across the world, internationally. And I never imagined my life being this way, but, I had the opportunity that someone gave me.
Wow, I had not known that. Over your years of leadership, what do you feel is the biggest lesson you've learned?
Oh, man. I absolutely love learning. I'm a life learner. I think the day I stop learning is the day that I probably stop living. So I'm constantly feeding myself. I think in this season, what I've learned the most is that it's all about being vulnerable. For many years, I was embarrassed. I would never tell anybody how old I was because I was always that super young leader. Back then, you could be on a conference call and no one sees your face. I was the guy who, like I said, dropped out of school. I went back and finished, but I dropped out of college. So I was embarrassed about that. So I lived this life of you never truly communicate your flaws. You kind of just got to show your best self. And I've really learned over the last 2-3 years that none of that matters. People want to know the person behind the title. Titles are cool. At the end of the day, leaders work for their employees. So your employees need to be able to see that, for one, you're actually serving them, but two, you're being real about your origins, because then they can see themselves in you and be able to say, okay, if this person who failed can step up and make a success out of themselves, I want to also go down that path. To me, leadership is not just about being a coach, developing people. It's also about being as honest as possible about your shortcomings and how you overcame them.
I know you're also passionate about resilience. Tell me a little bit about that.
Throughout my career, I've been across multiple layoffs, right? I've been a part of companies that were, hey, if we don't get this done, the company fails tomorrow. Or departments that could crumble if we don't turn it around. What I've learned is that sometimes the best skill you can have is resilience. You build that through pressure. And right now, we're in a space where almost every single organization is feeling pressure. The macroeconomic environment is scary. And even for the employees who fortunately didn't get laid off and have their jobs, they're working harder than they did before. This is where you kind of make or break, sink or swim. And I believe resilience is so important because your ability to bounce back is infectious. So if I see that my leader is able to take a loss and still come back and play the game, it motivates me to do so. But when you don't have that, you kind of have that mindset of everything is falling, the sky's falling, everything's horrible, the rest of the team panics as well. Even in our personal lives, we've all been through something, whether it was me being homeless or me losing both of my parents before I was 30. I could have allowed those opportunities to be a setback for me, but instead I've said, okay, let's push forward and instead lean into the people on my team because I learned from them just as much as they learned from me. And that's kind of helped me along the way.
How would you say leaders can make positive impacts in the lives of others?
Leadership, having a management position, supervisor title, you think your job is to come in and tell people what to do. Like when you first get the opportunity, you're thinking, oh, I'm here, I'm going to be the boss. And that's not what it is. We hear the term servant leadership so much now. That's the key. You want to have servant leadership, but that's not the ultimate goal. I truly believe the ultimate goal as a leader is to impact the lives of others. What can you do to turn someone's life around? And I'll give you an example. My first management opportunity, I relocated to Mexico. Don't speak Spanish. My wife, she was pregnant at the time, and our 4-year-old, we moved to Mexico. Don't know anyone, don't have any family, but I knew my leader. She was the only one I knew there. My team, I hired 5 individuals as my real-time analyst. And it's my first time building a team. My biggest fear was training because I had no clue how to do that effectively. And they taught me a lot. But being there, I met some amazing people. And one of those people, his name was Caesar. Caesar, I hired him on from the call center floor as an analyst because I got really good feedback that, hey, this guy's sharp. Even though he's a call center agent, he could do this analyst thing. And I found out his background. He was actually an engineer living in Arizona with his wife and his 3 kids. He was making the equivalent of almost $90,000 today. His wife was born in the States, so were his children. Unfortunately, he got deported based on a technicality. His family came with him. So they ended up living in a shed in his aunt's backyard, 1-room shed with him, his wife, and his 3 kids. You would never know it because he didn't carry that energy to work. As he was working with me, I'm like, this man is amazing. You know, what he's able to do. And I allowed him to really be his best self. And I had an opportunity to take on a new department. And I said, hey, Caesar, I would like for you to lead this team. So I made him the supervisor of that department. And by the time I left that company, he got promoted to manager. And he showed me the home that he built for his family. That was one of the greatest joys of my life because you could see someone went from making $90,000 to $4 an hour to being able to once again take care of their family. And that to me is the impact. We're changing lives, whether you're in customer support where you're impacting your employees and your customers, because as customers interact with you, they may start the day or start that moment stressed out because they're having an issue. But your ability to pivot that emotion and change their sentiment is important. So I think that's the ultimate purpose of leadership, is to impact lives.
Now, I'm curious. I lived in Egypt a little bit for my job at Affectiva. I learned some Arabic while I was there. I'm curious, when you were in Mexico, how much Spanish did you learn? I became what I would say is I could speak navigational Arabic and I could speak restaurant Arabic. I could order in a restaurant and I could tell a rideshare driver how to get to my apartment.
We're in the same boat. I always tell people that I can order food. Like, that's the one thing I can do. And it was so important because you have to.
Yep.
And I got lucky because we were in a Ford plant town. So it was a huge Ford plant. So a lot of people spoke English, but they weren't confident in speaking it. So they still wouldn't want to speak it to you. And at work, we were only allowed to speak English. So I didn't really get to learn like I wanted. In my office, though, when we shut the door, I told my team, speak Spanish. I want to pick it up.
Yeah.
What I loved about that experience was that, growing up in Atlanta, I went to school with a lot of Mexican immigrants. And you would meet their parents, and their parents would be shy. And my parents were immigrants as well. They come from Nigeria, where national language is English. So for them to come over, it wasn't as difficult. I got a new sense of empathy of what it's like to be somewhere and not be able to communicate, because even though I could communicate slightly, I didn't have my personality. I couldn't make jokes. So you kind of lose who you are. So now whenever I meet someone that's trying to learn this language, I'm overly empathetic to their situation and not judgmental at all.
Yeah. I found that when I was living in Egypt, I became a much better listener. Even after coming back to the US, I found that I talk less.
Yeah.
I actually am just more engaged in listening. And when I was in Egypt, a lot of it was I'm just listening to the language. And I'm like, oh, I've heard that word before. Okay, I have to ask, what's Hamza? Oh, it's 5. Okay. Well, I picked up a new word today. Awesome.
That's awesome. That's beautiful, though. My wife and I, we really want to go to Egypt. I definitely have to pick your brain on what that experience was like.
Yeah. Email me after. I do love Egypt. Absolutely. I want to circle back to what you said earlier about your time being homeless. Yeah. How did you get from there to maybe not where you are now to out of that situation? I just assumed that somebody gave you a chance, and like, what was that chance like? And how did you get out of that situation? And how can leaders that are listening to this podcast help people that are in a similar situation?
Yeah, for me, it was, you have to humble yourself first. A lot of times we have pride. So I remember there was a day where a friend let me sleep on his floor, and the next night I didn't want to ask him again, right? Because it's like, hey, I don't want to tell him that this is actually a permanent thing. To this day, he doesn't even know. Like, I would never, I have never had this conversation. You first have to humble yourself and realize step 1 is digging out of the hole. And step 2 is being honest about the hole. Like, let people know what's going on. And where I got lucky was that when I finally got a job opportunity, my mother got her life back on her feet. She was dealing with kidney failure towards the end of my high school journey. And she found herself in a place where she had to stop working. So the house was going to get foreclosed. And at the time when I was homeless, she was living in my friend's attic. I'm bouncing around. And then my dad and his, he remarried, and I could sleep on their couch every now and then, but there wasn't a home that I could stay in. When she got back on her feet, it was perfect timing because I could no longer drive my car. My car couldn't pass the emissions test. So if you live in a state with the emissions test, you're going to get a ticket. And I got a lot of tickets. So I'm at a point now where it's like, okay, humble yourself, go back with mom. And I was living on my own. I'm back with mom. It's embarrassing. I started walking to work every day. I got a job at Wet Seal at the mall. And that's my hack to everybody, get a job at a woman's store if you can break down boxes because they always need help. So it's probably paying me $6 an hour, and I got that job. Then I got a second job at Finish Line selling shoes upstairs. And then I got a third job at Walgreens, the pharmacy. And I was working all three simultaneously. And it was really about, okay, how can I get myself out of this hole, earn enough money to fix my car, earn enough money to kind of pay off whatever debts that I have. And when I was working at Walgreens, my first day of work, my leader, Mr. Crosby, I'll never forget his name, he says, "Hey, come to the back stock room with me." And we look up and there's like a wall, there's shelves that go 50 feet high. And he says, "I need you to get on top of there. I'm going to hand you these metal shelves that are about 5 to 10 pounds each. I need you to stack them 12 feet high." And did this all day long, my first day of work. And I was scared, but I did it. And after we did it, he was so impressed by my ability to just dig in and help that he allowed me to work there full time. It wasn't part time anymore. And that allowed me to now have one job. And then I continued to work hard there and I got promoted to the pharmacy. And while I was at the pharmacy, it was a great experience, but it still didn't pay well. And I had a family friend who said, "Hey, we actually have a pharmaceutical call center." I'm like, "What's a call center?" And I'm like, "Wait a minute, I can sit down all day." I've been working on my feet my entire career. I went from fast food to retail to pharmaceuticals. Wow, I get to sit down. I would love to do that. I didn't have a resume. So he said, "Let me help you put your resume together." Never knew what that was. He put it together with me. And then I was able to interview and I got the job opportunity. And then I almost doubled my salary, making $12.50 an hour, which was huge to me back then. That story is that I didn't do it by myself. I was honest about where I was. I was willing to sacrifice and walk. I was willing to work multiple jobs. I was willing to work hard. And people naturally wanted to help me along the way, because when you sit with your hand out, but you're not putting any effort behind it, that's when people don't really want to help you. If they see that you're doing something to make a difference, everyone's there for you. So I don't believe in the notion that we make ourselves, we don't make ourselves. We get built up by other people. So just be honest and transparent and work hard.
Do you feel like it would have been harder to succeed in that way in today's economy?
No, because I think we have different avenues today than we had back then. We have ride sharing. You can be more entrepreneurial now. It doesn't mean that that you're going to have a living wage at all. I think today it's harder to have a living wage than it was back then. You're definitely going to need a roommate, but the opportunity to generate income is different today. However, I think it was during the recession. So I was going through all of this right at the beginning of the recession when I was on the cusp of it. So everything was like great. And then it all fell apart right when I started getting my jobs. So I remember my first couple call center jobs, a lot of people were getting laid off. And I was lucky that I never did. But it was like, when are we going to get our notice? And I would hop around to different companies to protect myself. So it's almost the exact same environment. But I think today there's so many other ways to generate income. Companies learned from the recession. So now it's a situation where it may be harder to get a job than it was then, because companies are fearful that it's going to get bad, even though it's not that bad yet.
Your website is Corporate Dad. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's for and the origin?
Yeah, it initially started, I was raised with 7 sisters. So I have 7 sisters, 1 brother, all on my dad's side. My mom's side, just me and my big sister. I ended up having 3 sons. And I'm like, I'm used to being around girls. I'm just going to be honest. I wasn't raised with boys. So it was like, okay, my boys are young and both of my parents passed away in their early 50s. So I said, okay, if I were to go tomorrow or in the next couple of years, what can I leave behind for them? So I said, I'm going to make a YouTube channel called Corporate Dad that gives back information to them. And it was a play off the book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because I'm a big fan of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, not necessarily the author anymore, but I won't get into that. But the book itself, if you haven't read it, it's a good read. It just helps you unlock your mind. But what I felt it was missing was that the middle person, because it talks about your poor dad, who's someone who's kind of working for the government or working a job and kind of just working to get by. And then it talks about Rich Dad, who doesn't have an education, but understands how to invest their money and build businesses. There's that person in the middle that's the corporate professional that wants to know, okay, how do I grow into leadership? How do I grow to executive roles? And we never really had that conversation. So I said, okay, I want to give my sons the tools for personal finance, give them the tools for how to scale in their careers if that's something they want to do, and just make sure I leave something documented behind. When I was working at Comcast, was when I first had this idea. I ended up having a lot of mentees organically where they were inspired just about my story, my journey, the way I led. And I realized, wow, no matter what age you are, this information is beneficial. I pivoted and I made Corporate Dad an organization where, I do public speaking. I do workshops where whether it's understanding how to find your purpose in your career, how to be a highly desirable candidate when you're interviewing, how to set yourself up for success in the first 90 days. And then I also have a book that's actually going to be published in the near future. And it's just about giving corporate professionals the tools they need to elevate in their careers in the way that they want to do so.
That's awesome. I'm sorry about your parents. 50, that is so young. My parents are still alive, and my oldest, who's 22, got to spend a little time with one of my grandparents.
Yeah. It's tough. The good thing is on my wife's side, both of her parents are still here, but also her grandparents, all of her grandparents are still here. I'm like, I don't know what they have in New Orleans, why they live so long. That's been a pleasure. At least my boys have that experience, but it's hard. Losing my mom was the hardest thing because she was really my why. My 20s was spent grinding. My wife and I, we got together young. I was 21. She was 18. We were pregnant within the first year. And statistically, we shouldn't be together. And I should be paying child support, statistically. And we decided to stick it out. But as a young person whose brain wasn't even fully developed, my mission was help my mom. She's in a place where she kept trying to work and couldn't do it because of her health. And her immigration status was an issue, so she wasn't getting paid her disability. And my grandmother was living with her. So now I'm taking care of my mother, my grandmother. My wife is trying to help out, and my son. And it was tough. So when she passed away, it hurt because my mission was before my mom passes away, I want her to have a few years where she can just relax. She had been working hard since she came to this country, and she deserved that. So I was lost. And for me, it was actually the realization of I wanted to see my mom have a better life and a better outcome, but I can pivot and have that for others. That's why I love leading, because I get to see it in the Caesars that I've been able to help, or the Claudias or the Wesleys, where I couldn't do what I want to do for my mom, but that doesn't mean that only she can get the help and care that I could offer. I can do it in other ways.
What is it like being a VP? Are there obvious differences from other leadership roles?
Yeah. When you become a manager / supervisor, depending on how your organization is structured, you're leading individual contributors typically. When you become a senior manager or director, you're then leading leaders. When you become a VP, you're leading leaders who lead leaders. So it's very different. And the way I always break it down is, how do you make sure you don't have a leadership structure that steps on toes? I always say you need to change time period you're looking at. So if I'm, for example, a supervisor, I may want to have, or a team manager, I may want to have a great week. So I'm managing it day over day to make sure we hit performance. If I'm a director, I want to have a great month. So I'm looking at it week over week. And if I'm a VP, I want to have a great year. I want to have a great quarter. So I'm looking at it month over month. So it kind of changes the span of ownership. But as a VP, your ultimate role is to think about where we're going, have a clear direction, clear vision for your culture, but then also remove roadblocks. The worst thing you can do is get caught up in what the problems are today. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that they don't hit your plate, but you have to be very good at filtering out, what can my team own? And I have a team of owners. I respect the leaders who report to me. So much where it's important for me to know they own their shops. And I basically make it easier for them to run their shops. And like I said, we have a reverse pyramid where the leaders, we all work for our team. So if the frontline agents don't exist, we don't have jobs. There's no point in me being here. So it's all about how can the next level serve the next. But it's tough. You're in these rooms. There are a lot of very direct conversations. And so you have to have thick skin and understand it's not personal. We're trying to solve the problem. So I give 2 tips. I say, a great leader, a great executive is not one who knows all the answers, but it's one who asks the right questions, because you want to be able to spark the right dialogue and understand that we can develop the right solutions. And the second one is you have to manage and maintain your cross-functional relationships. You can't do this alone. If you're a VP plus who doesn't do well or play well with others, you won't be successful for long, because the 2 heads of the department are butting heads. Of course, the teams underneath will also have a difficult job working together. So those are the two things, or three things really. It's being strategic, having a long-term view, being able to ask the right questions and not try to have all the answers, and then also prioritizing, maintaining, and building those cross-functional relationships.
When I was at Affectiva, I worked directly for the COO, and he worked directly for the CEO. And especially the CEO, I saw her, to use a word behind you, which our podcast listeners can't see, hustle. Yeah. She would hustle. She would get 4 hours of sleep. She was a single mother of 2 kids. I think one was maybe preteen and the other was maybe like 6 or 7. And she was just on nonstop. And it really drove home to me, or gave me the message, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be an executive. But I know that not all executives are like that. And even I think my COO, who I work directly for, I think he had a better work-life balance. Tell me about that, like managing. What's the balance like? Do you feel it depends on the leader and the company? And how do you make it worth it?
Yeah. This may come off as a little harsh to my peers. So in advance, I apologize, but I'll give some context. My mother, my entire life, she worked in restaurants, a lot of fast food restaurants as a leader. Store manager, she would have been a regional manager, regional director. Right when she got sick, that was the next opportunity for her. But her peers, she would constantly go to different locations because you get new opportunities with new companies. And her peers would be so angry at her because when she would come in, you walk into a McDonald's, you're used to kind of them scrambling it around, not being efficient. She would always be able to actually sit down on her job. It'd be calm during her shift. And the reason why is because she prioritized organization, making sure she could build a team with momentum, that things were going to happen at the right time with the right ownership. Whereas the other leaders felt as if their leadership was directly correlated to their ability to do the job. And that's not the truth. I love the analogy of once you become a leader, you're no longer Michael Jordan, you're Phil Jackson. You have to be the coach now. And it's hard because we like to promote our star players, but our star players aren't necessarily the best leaders, or they don't know what success looks like, because success has meant I've killed everyone else on my team. And really as a coach or a leader now, it's how can I make new copies of me, but respect who they are as individuals. I'm just helping them become as great as I was. So it flips. So for me, when I see leaders who are working really hard, because that was me for a long time, my first director and VP opportunity was the same company. I was working 12-hour days because my days were so busy. And then I wanted to still spend time with my team and engage with them. And I'd come home and I'd crash on the couch and I wasn't there for my family. I wasn't. Maybe on the weekends. I've learned that if you don't prioritize having the right processes and structures and creating different levels of ownership on your team, you try to do everything and now you have no balance. Hustle's great, but it doesn't trump proper planning. It just doesn't. So what I normally do is I hustle to get the system set up so that I don't have to hustle forever. And like I said, apologies to my peers, but when I see them in that challenge, it's because they didn't take the time to properly structure it. Now, it doesn't mean that things don't happen where the industry may change or there's interjections at the company where we need more time, but it shouldn't be an everyday thing. And I'm always on call. I'm always on my Slack. Whether I'm on vacation or not, I don't mute it. I'm always listening. But my team knows where they can make decisions and where they don't need me.
Tell me about the signs that are behind you. I'm guessing that they're important to you and guessing that your team sees them all the time. And I'm probably your upper management sees them all the time. What do they mean to you?
Yeah. So they say hustle, grind, and execution. There are times where when you're in business, it's easy to get fatigued. It's easy to say, okay, once again, we did great yesterday, but can we do it again? Especially if you're in the sales department or if you're in any IT field or tech field where you have to constantly build new products. It puts you in a place where you can get fatigued and it's like, okay, hustle. And like I said, the way I view hustle is you hustle to build the system. Grind to me is you're grinding to make sure that you're getting through what you need to get through. That component of putting a little bit of resilience in there and kind of building muscle. Then execution is whatever we do, we have to finish. So I had a good conversation with my wife the other day and I said, it takes courage to start, but it takes discipline to finish. that's where a lot of us end up at work. We start a lot of things. We don't execute. We don't really finish it all the way through. So I need to, as a right reminder to myself, because we have 20 different initiatives going on right now. So it's hustle to make sure we're getting it set up properly. Let's grind. And that even means with our people. Like, let's make sure that we're putting in the effort to make our people happy. And let's execute on what we said we were, because our teams will hold us accountable to it, and so will our customers.
And then on the flip side, there's sometimes projects that need to get put down. How do you talk to your team about that? Because there's always the sunk cost fallacy that comes up with how do you, because I'm sure that there are a lot of projects that you've had to put down, had to tell your team, hey, that was awesome. You guys have been doing a great job. You know, you spent months, years, decades on it, but it's time to shut that down and we're moving to something else. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's funny. We had a major switch like that recently that I probably can't disclose publicly, so I won't. But we also had a minor one that actually happened yesterday. And I think for one, it starts with your culture. You have to make sure you create a culture of knowing that it's okay to fail. We hear it a lot now, fail fast, especially in tech. That's kind of getting a little bit overused because using that where we don't have proper change management. My take on it is fail with understanding, and it's okay to do that. At the same time, the example from yesterday, we were looking and we said, okay, we have a holiday policy right now that pays our support center employees a good amount of money whenever there's a holiday if they work. And I'm not used to a policy like this. It's very expensive. So myself, finance, HR, a couple members of my team, we've been meeting and to say, how do we revamp this? We've been coming up with new iterations so it makes sense. And yesterday, I pulled the plug on it. I said, you know what? Our team has been through so much change in such a short period of time. Let's leave this alone. And at that moment, it was no longer about just the numbers behind it. It was about the people. So the sunk cost, we've been working on this for weeks now to get this corrected. So yes, there was a sunk cost there, but the ROI is that we have a better understanding of what our values are. Right now, we're valuing the morale of our people at a much higher value than we were valuing saving a couple of dollars. So I think we needed to go through that. And I think it was a relief in some respects to my team when I brought it up. Maybe they felt like I wasted their time a little bit, but it's just fair that we actually went through the exercise of understanding first how we got there, what could we do differently, but then we decided maybe it's better to wait a year or two before we make this change.
Who's your favorite leader to have worked for and why?
Oh, wow. There's two that come to mind. One I worked for directly and one I did not. The one I worked for directly would be Heather Joel. She was the one who gave me the opportunity to relocate to Mexico. She's from Wisconsin, big personality, great woman, powerful leader. She gave me an opportunity to become a manager when I was getting overlooked back to back. And not only did she do that, but she trusted me. When I got there, she let me run the play. Whatever I needed, go ahead and figure it out. Our one-on-ones were more so about advice versus telling me what to do. And she just trusted me. And I think that was the first time in my career because I didn't plan on going to leadership professionally. It happened in my personal life, but professionally, it was never the goal. She started opening my mind to who and what I could be. And I remember her telling me, when you move to Mexico, your career would never be the same. Showing that you've been willing to go abroad and understand a different culture and lead an international team is important. And she was right. Since then, I've led teams in 7 different countries. I appreciate her for that. The other leader is by far, if I could say, the leader I want to become, the man I want to become, the human I want to become, it's Steve White. Steve White was the president of the West Division at Comcast. He had a background where he was raised by a single mother. He and his 3 brothers, he's the oldest of the 3. And she would have to work while he would be at home with the other brothers and having to protect them and lock the doors. And he was able to work himself up through school. School, got great jobs and had been in his career for decades and made it all the way to the president of a division where his division alone could be a Fortune 500 company. That's how big it was. And so for me to see that, especially as a Black man, I had never seen that before. His charisma and his understanding of people, he could walk into any room and no matter the background of that room, he was so inclusive. He just understood how to connect with people and put people first and how to be diverse in the right way, where you're doing it organically and authentically and you're truly caring about thought. But then he had that balance of, you better have your numbers together. You better be ready. It's going to be tough conversations. So he knew every aspect of his business and he really understood that everyone needed to be owners. I actually have his book. He has a book called Uncompromising that I'm a huge fan of. And he and I are actually going to work together in a couple weeks for the first time. It's kind of coming back full circle. Steve White is definitely someone who this is the leader I would love to become. Will I ever get there? I have no clue, but I'm going to keep working towards it.
You mentioned that you had done some leadership outside of work. I'm curious what that was and how you see the relationship between, I'm assuming it's volunteer leadership, but I don't even know, how you see the relationship between professional leadership and the kind of leadership that you were doing outside of work.
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of things. Like, for example, leading my family, taking care of my family when I was the baby of the family, Even I tried to have my own startups at one point. I had two of them. One was a dating site and one was a social media site. I had a small team and we try to work on that. To your point, it was also in the community. I've always been someone who is maybe a little overly empathetic with the struggles of others. I've always been a fan of how can I go talk to some students and how can I help someone's little sister or little brother out. It's always come from a place of I don't want anything back and I don't expect anything back. And I think that was the important part for me, was that I wasn't looking for a title. I was just looking to help people. As I transitioned to leadership, it wasn't something I was going for because I was just fine being an IC at the time, but people kind of push you there. So when people see something in you, they're like, wait a minute, you're the one that we all naturally feel the safest with, that we all feel not just from we think you care about us, but we also feel safe with your judgment. Really others who helped me see that throughout my personal life and then also at work, because that first leadership opportunity I ended up leading my peers who had been there before me. So it wasn't an official promotion. My leader at the time, he left the organization. So our department VP, unfortunately, got ousted from the company because there was a new leadership takeover. But when he left, my supervisor was his number one guy. That was his right-hand man. So he took him with him. So my two peers are in Utah. I'm in Atlanta and I'm freaking out because I'm an analyst now. I don't have to be on the call center phones. This is great. I don't want to lose this job. In my mind, naturally, this role should go to Utah. So I just stepped up the next morning and said, okay, I'm the senior analyst. What can I do to help? And I started leading all the calls with cross-functional partners, leading them, coming up with a strategy. And they felt comfortable with it because I came from a place of humility. From day one, I had an ego and I'm telling them what to do. Neither one of them would have listened to me. But I think it's because my leadership style, being in a place where it wasn't about leading, it was about serving, that's what helped me along the way.
Is there anything you want to plug?
Oh, yes. I'm not the biggest plugger, but I need to start doing better at that. As I mentioned, a corporate dad, of course, I do my speaking and workshops, but I'm getting ready to actually publish my first book. I'm excited about it.
Congrats.
Thank you. It's called LinkedIn Professional Brand Guide and Planner. And the reason why I'm doing that is that, going back to the question you asked me earlier about today versus yesterday, we're in an era now where as employees or as professionals or as service providers, really as employees, we have the ability to own our career narrative. For many years, it was about what does your company say about you? What do your references look like? What are your recommendations? Whereas now on LinkedIn, we actually get to show our talent. Yeah. We get to show what we know so we can so that we're thought leaders in a space. And so I'm a big fan of having a rock star profile, showing everything that you've done, but constantly posting, whether you want to stay with your organization or not. It's important because as your organization sees what you're posting, they're like, oh, this is somebody that we didn't know had this skill. Let's see if we can have them as an opportunity for something internally, and vice versa. Other companies would do the same thing. They'll reach out to you and see if you're open to opportunities. But it's really about owning your professional brand. And unfortunately, 80% of us don't do it. We don't maximize LinkedIn. We will read things and we never post anything. This book is really to help individuals understand how to do that. And there's a planner where you can actually, okay, here's the guide on how to best do it, how to best set up your profile and your content, because content's the number one reason why people don't post. They don't know what to post. Yeah. But then it has a planner in it that breaks down and helps you keep track of your strategies. To me, it's not about making money off the book. It's more so about, I've been doing a lot of speaking lately, and I want to leave people with something tangible that after I'm gone, they're able to still actually utilize the information, because you can only digest but so much in one conversation. In addition, it's going to be on Amazon. So I'm publishing on Amazon so anybody can access it. I'm excited about it.
That's awesome. I have struggled to get some of my employees over the years to build up their LinkedIn, it's really important for their career. It can really help them. I even had one person who was like freaked out by the fact that sometimes I would visit his LinkedIn, and he was like, "Why are you looking at my LinkedIn? Are you spying on me? This whole company is spying." And I was like, "No, like I wanted to get some background about you so I could help you. I wanted to make some suggestions for your LinkedIn."
Yeah. And it's good to, especially depending on the role. For example, a person like Ray, I love Ray. I love that he's maximizing his LinkedIn. I tell him, I said, your voice is important as an LGBTQ, Latin American, person of color in a director role. People need to hear your voice to know it's possible and to also know what your view is on employee leadership and customer experience, because we need diversity of thought. So you'll notice my team is some members of my team are starting to post a lot more because representation matters. And I'm just excited that, to your point, they're starting to get more comfortable with it. Some will never, ever post, but I hope that one day they get comfortable with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think some of the employees have just been like anti-social media. And I get that. I'm very kind of anti-Facebook.
Yeah.
And then there's just also the ones that are just super private.
Yeah.
So it is what it is, I guess. It sounds like your book will be really helpful for people, and I might recommend it to people when I encounter that kind of resistance. Like, hey, you might want to update your LinkedIn. I'm not saying leave, but this is for your career.
Yes.
Who's one person you feel I should absolutely interview?
Oh, good former colleague of mine. I absolutely adore her. Her name is Mackenzie Roebuck Walsh. So I may even have to spell that for you. I'd be happy to send you her LinkedIn. Mackenzie's incredible. She's someone who not only was a great partner, but also a great friend when I needed one. She gave me free advice because I was interviewing for director of retail opportunity for a different division, and she was willing to coach me and develop me on it and connect me with different people on that opportunity. Fortunately, it didn't happen because we did a pause of hiring the role at the time. But the fact that she would take time out of her busy schedule when she was leading an entire region was so important to me. And then she's done a TED Talk. And I know she wants to get back into speaking as well, because she's also at a place where she's mentoring, she's giving back. But I just think her voice is so powerful, and I think she'd be someone great to have a conversation with.
That's awesome, Sean. Anything else we should cover before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think the last thing I would say is that this is not an easy time to be in, no matter really where you are in the world right now, not just in the US. And it can feel as if we're all divided. It can feel as if even you go on LinkedIn professionally at work, we're having these tough conversations or these prejudiced conversations. And I'm a true believer that we're mostly the same versus being different. And there's mostly good people in this world. Whether or not we have good views, most of us want to see a better world for ourselves and our children. And let's not give up hope that we can help each other along the way. As I mentioned, I didn't make myself. No one makes themselves. There's even people who helped me along the way that I don't agree with, but I've been able to learn from them. So let's continue to be life learners. Let's continue to care about the well-being of the people around us, but then also care about the well-being of yourself, because you deserve to be happy and being your authentic self.
Awesome. Well said. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Leadership Cast. Please subscribe, rate, and share the podcast. Become part of the conversation by joining our Discord server. The opening music is Like a Prism by Maya Jisama. The closing song is Something About You by Marilyn Ford. Until next time, goodbye.
There's something about you, and I can't let go. But there's something about